For most Black Americans, especially those in the South, the front porch isn't just part of the entry into the house. It is the place we enter community. It's not just the comfort or safety we experience there, but it's where we do some people watching and good reflection. On the front porch is where we tell the truth with a little sweetener and an awesome time along the way. We take what we learn and we act. On this episode, we discuss all things related to youth, education, community, and the politics of people.
Hey, good people, it is KaCey, and welcome back to the front porch. Well, today we're going to do something just a little different. I'm going to give you all some things that I hold near and dear to my heart, and it's really inspired from a post that I put up on the first day of school here in Atlanta. They've already gone back on August 1st. And the organization that I co-founded and I serve as executive director for, we took small gifts and donuts to the leaders just to say, hey, we're here with you in the trenches, happy first day of school. And I posted something later that day, really just to motivate myself. But the end of it, I wrote a particular quote that someone very, very special would say to me. And I added my own little bit to the end of it because I realized, oh, this was the second part of it. This is probably what this special person meant all along. And I'm talking a little bit in code right now. Those who know me probably already know who this person is, but I'm often asked, why do I do this work? Right? Why do I want to serve Black male youth in particular? Why them? And some things you can't always explain. It's just something that you do because it's a part of who you are. And I believe that I've watched it all of my life. My father was the community uncle, right? Everybody knew Uncle Henry, or everybody knew Mr. Venning. But everybody knew to come to him for wisdom, for a good laugh. They knew he would point them in the right direction. I'm my father's 9th biological child. I am the 10th of all the children that he would go on to claim. And he claimed all of them. So let me put that disclaimer there. But when my father passed and we wrote in his obituary, it wasn't just his biological children, right? It wasn't just his adopted son. It was also 5 other men in particular that were listed as my father's surrogate sons, but they were a representative of so many other young men that he got to engage and his life impacted theirs. And when I innately came to this work, when I was forced to stop, right? Shout out to Rohit over at Center for Civic Innovation. I had to get clear about my origin story, right? Thank you, Joey, for introducing me to that concept too. Joey Womack over at Goody Nation. And the origin story wasn't about the work we did. It wasn't about, oh, tell me the beginning stages of Hey, right? The origin story is, what was the catalyst? What happened to get you to the point that Hey even needed to exist, right? And when I sat with myself, it went back to my daddy. It went back to my daddy. And it went back to watching how he lived his life so authentically that others wanted just a piece of it. Just a piece of it. I Also remember at my father's homegoing celebration, right? You know how Black folks do in funerals. There was this young white guy who stood up, and everybody is looking at each other like, who is that? And we're like, we have no clue. And he stood up and he said that he saw my father's obituary in the paper. He turned to his wife and said, I'd be really regretful and remorseful if I did not attend Mr. Venning's funeral. And he said, I met Mr. Venning one time in a parking lot with a 5-minute conversation, and it's forever changed my life. And I said to myself then that if I could be half the man that Mr. Venning was, then I would be a successful man. White guy, young white guy. My dad was an old Black man. 5-minute conversation in a parking lot changed his life so much that he felt it was a responsibility to show up to pay his last respects to my father at his funeral. That in and of itself is the quickest reminder that I can give myself around how you can live your life in a way that is going to impact somebody else. And a seed was planted, and that young man hopefully took whatever wisdom he gleaned from my daddy, and then he went on to want to be a different type of person, to be a different type of man. And so on Tuesday, I think it was the next day after, the first day of school, I put a quote up on one of my Instagram accounts. And at the end of it, I said, Daddy reminded us often there's always a ram in the bush. And he did. Anytime we would be worried about something, and that's not necessarily something new, right? I've heard other people say it, as I've gotten older. And for those of us who are Christians, we know the story, right? But Daddy would always tell us anytime we would seem stressed or worried, there's always a ram in the bush. Meaning there's always something there that is going to give you what you need, give you a clear answer, a clear understanding. A resource is going to be provided. Another material is going to be sourced. Whatever it is, whatever you need. When you think that you are down to your last option and it's not what you want, not what you need, not what you heard, clearly God say to you, there's always going to be a ram in the bush. And the part that I added was, sometimes we are the ram. And for me, that is so special. And I'm like almost emotional right now about it, because for me, that part, sometimes we are the ram, is personal for me, because I often deal with imposter syndrome. I often deal with, I'm not supposed to be in these rooms that I'm in, right? I don't know how to really fully absorb what it is that people say about me in terms of impact that I've been able to make. Because I'm like, are you sure you're talking about me? Right? I mean, we all have our stuff. We all may deal with some areas of, unworthiness, but like, I honestly have to fight every day through imposter syndrome. And some days I fight it well, and I'm like, I can conquer the world. Like, how dare they not know who I am? And other days I'm like, dang, I hope they don't find me out. And when I realize that sometimes I am the ram, when I realize that I am the answer, right? When I am the person who can solve this problem, even for myself, it gives a whole new level of empowerment to go out there and to continue to serve community, to continue to serve these young people. I am in my last couple of semesters at the Interdenominational Theological Center working towards my Master of Divinity. And we're always talking about being prophetic problem solvers. We're always talking about, relevant ministry, and ministry being beyond the four walls of the church. Now, hear me. There's a lot of work that needs to be done inside the four walls for it to be relevant there. But, the work of the ministry for me has always been in community, has always been in the streets. Because if you're a Christian and you're a follower of Christ, then you know that really the only time Jesus walked up into a temple, walked into this organized place of worship, was to really check them. All right. That's where he flipped tables over at. That's where he asked them, like, yo, what is y'all doing? Jesus's ministry was in the street. It was among the people. And when I see that we don't take that to heart and let that be kind of the priority ministry as an organized body, then, it makes me kind of just wonder sometimes, like, are we really being relevant? Are we really being prophetic problem solvers? And, I've said it on here before, I'm licensed, I'm ordained, which means for somebody, if you're not, churched, I can marry you and I can bury you, right? I can administer the holy sacraments of communion. However, I honestly believe the most ministry I've ever done has been with these young men in these streets. When it is talking very plain language to them, and maybe sometimes language that folks would cringe if you heard some of the conversations. But the bottom line is we get to the heart of the matter and we begin to see change. And so that's my why, my daddy. Watching my daddy do it, right? Watching him have so much love that none of his children, never his wife, ever felt as though he was dividing himself too much. Daddy had this innate ability to make you feel like you were the only person in the world when he was talking to you. Never distracted. And I want to have that kind of impact. I want to have that kind of impact in this world. That when people encounter me, their lives are changed because I'm authentic. I'm sincere. I'm clear about who I am. And I make them feel like they're the only person in the world when they have my undivided attention. So today, I want to give you a couple of more daddy lessons, right? When I first heard that song by Beyonce, I was like, dang, she's been all up in my diary, all up in my journal, my book. Like she must have had a glimpse of what the relationship was like with my own daddy. But I want to just call out a couple of things that I think really carry me over. One is there's always a ram in the bush, right? And we talked a little bit about that already. Another one is what I just alluded to. Well, not alluded to, I really just explained it to you. Was that let your light so shine that in 5 minutes others can't and won't forget you. Right? That's the story of that young white man who came to my father's funeral. And what we took for granted, honestly, other people understood was a rarity, was something very special that they held on to. Mentor someone else's child. Gosh, when I think about even my cousins, right? My biological blood-related cousins that my father mentored. When I think about, Cheese, when I think about Peanut, who's my cousin too. I think about these young men that my daddy mentored. What else? Scare the living, out of your kids. Like daddy, I would come home and I knew his truck was in the yard, right? Cause you couldn't miss Big Red. And I would call out, right? Because I was quintessential daddy's girl. Like I always wanted to be around my daddy. And so whenever I would come home from school or come home from an activity and I saw his truck in the yard, I would be really, really excited because I got to see my daddy. And I was going in the house and I'm calling and I'm looking and I'm calling and I'm looking and I can't see him and he's not responding to me. And I walk down the hall and the hall can be dark because the light switch is at the other end of the hallway because it was an older home that my father really renovated and refurbished and rebuilt for my mom. And I go to walk down this dark long hallway. And my father comes out of the living room screaming. I'm like literally to the point everything in my hand falls. I'm shaking. Like I couldn't get myself together for quite a bit. And my daddy is literally laughing hysterically at the fact that he got me good. And I say that just to say that Daddy made sure that he had fun with us. It was never I'm the father, I lay down the law, always serious, like always a jokester, always the life of the party, right? There'd be things I was like, oh, Daddy, do this in front of my friends, right? Because I wanted to impress them. Like, here's this 60-something-year-old man who was riding his bicycle backwards, right? Or he was the only adult who was playing volleyball with us. Or he would, foot race, the boys down the street, like well into his 60s, right? It didn't matter. He wanted to ensure that when people were around him, they had a good time. And so he always found ways to do that. Sing off key and laugh loudly. Right? I remember the first time I saw my daddy sing a solo in the male chorus at Morning Star Baptist Church, and we were excited because I didn't care what my daddy sounded like. I was gonna root for the home team. You hear me? And he found his groove eventually, and it was one of those things where he couldn't let it go, right? Because if you're not a singer, and I'm not saying that I am, right? But I'm just saying that when you're a singer, you know how to make the transitions, right? You know how to end the song. You know all the little ins and outs of what you want to convey. And so when you're not a singer, you don't know how to do that. And I remember an awesome friend of the family, to the point where Herbie was just family. Herbie was playing an organ, and all I always saw was Herbie trying to stifle this laughter that he wanted to give, because he kept trying to jump in to help Daddy, in the song or whatever. And eventually it got to the end of it. But he had a blast. He had such a good time, and everybody in the congregation had a good time too, because it wasn't about whether or not he was off key or on pitch or whatever. It was, he was enjoying himself singing a song with some of his best friends, and it was contagious. It was contagious. Daddy would forever tell an old Geechee Gullah folklore story that would have all the boys on the block laughing like, Uncle Henry, that's not true. And Daddy would wink, right? Not to say if it was or not, but they had a good time and they laughed. And Daddy made sure that he helped to facilitate a lot of that. Make no apologies for how you love. None. Make no apologies for how you love. Daddy loved hard. And I think that's where I get it from. Sometimes it's a blessing and a curse. But he made sure that there was never a moment or a doubt in your mind as to whether or not he loved you, he cared for you, he wanted the best for you, and whatever he could do to help make sure that happened, that's exactly what he did. Right? Say, I love you often. Say, I love you often. Like, multiple times a day, he would tell me that he loved me, and I would tell him I loved him back. And that's something that has always been embedded in me, that those who are close to me know that I say I love you, right? There's some who get I love you every day. There's others who get them on a regular basis. But saying I love you is easy for me because I heard it often growing up. Right? I talk to my mom multiple times of the day, and a lot of times it even ends with I love you. Even if I talk to her 5 times that day, does not matter. And for me, I always wonder why it's hard for others to say I love you. Right? Whether they heard it growing up, whether they didn't, whether they reserve it for somebody very, very special in their lives. But saying I love you is easy, not because those words don't mean much to me, but because that person means so much to me. I want them to know how I feel at every single turn. The last one I'm going to share with you, because I have a lot of them, is 2x4 strength. 2x4 strength. I'm trying to figure out how I really want to take that and turn it into something else. I'm not sure what it is, but my daddy was a carpenter. He was a licensed contractor. And there was this hardware store in Virginia. I think it was in Norfolk, actually. And it was called Moore's. So, think of like Ace, True Value, smaller versions of a Home Depot or a Lowe's, that kind of thing. And I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, like old enough to know what was happening wasn't supposed to be happening, and old enough to be scared. So we were walking out of the store, and my daddy had went and purchased, I think, about 20, like 6-foot long 2x4s, right? And 2x4s are the pieces of wood that you use a lot for framing when you're framing a house, framing a room. Sometimes when you see people who have custom decks, they're 2x4s, that you see a lot of the times being used. And so daddy was picking up materials for a job, and it happened to be 2x4s on that day. And so we were rolling them back to the cart, and we were putting them on the back of the truck, right on the bed of the truck. And we were almost finished. And there was 2 white boys that walked up, and they wanted the cart because I guess all the other carts were being used or already inside of the building. And so they wanted the cart. So a young white boy said to my daddy, I need you to hurry up. And so my daddy just kind of looked back and knew we were almost finished. So, he was taking his time. We weren't like taking 5 minutes to put a 2x4 on, but it wasn't enough for someone to tell anybody to hurry up. And so my daddy kept going at the pace that he was going. And these 2 white boys got a little closer. And he said to my father, "Boy, did you not hear me when I told you to hurry up?" Now, y'all, this is like late 1980s in Virginia. When that person, I was going to give y'all the Geechee version of what he was, but, some things you got to hold to yourself. When that person told my daddy that, my daddy literally said to me, "KaCey, get in the truck." So I got in the truck because, I did what daddy said. But we had one of those trucks where the back window would open up, like you could slide it, right? And so I got in the truck and I slid the back window so I could still hear and see as much as possible what was happening without like hanging out the side of the window. Now, mind you, y'all, my daddy was born in 1926 in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, which is literally right next to Charleston. If you are driving on Highway 17, you're going to get off of the Cooper River Bridge, and the base of the bridge is literally going to put you to Highway 17. You're going to make like a quick right, and you're going to go down the street where my daddy was born on, right? So I was born in South Carolina, in the South, 1926. So my father lived through lynchings, Jim Crow, Civil Rights Movement, right? Can you imagine being born in 1926? Can you imagine being drafted into World War II as a Black man from the South? This is my daddy's, like, part of his history, right? So I can only imagine what my daddy felt like when he heard this young white boy call him a boy with all his gray hair in front of his daughter. Well, daddy didn't say much of anything. Daddy took one of those 2x4s and he cracked that boy upside his head. So much so he was a little disoriented, right? Fell to his knees. His friend is calling for help and, demanding that my daddy get arrested. My daddy didn't move fast. He put that same 2x4 back on the truck, walked slowly to the front of the truck, got in, made sure I had my seatbelt on, and we drove off. I got home and I'm crying and I'm sad. I'm like, mommy, daddy almost killed somebody. Daddy almost killed somebody. And Daddy was like, girl, I ain't kill nobody, right? He said, but I bet you he won't say that again. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm still a little shaken up, but that story never left me because it wasn't so much about me walking around with a 2x4, right? Waiting to hit people over their head with it when they come out their mouth sideways. It was more so what I learned is that you take what you have and you disarm people. You take what you have, you use whatever your metaphorical 2x4 power is, and you disarm people. You put them on their knees. You make them think twice about trying you again when you use what you have. And every time somebody comes at me left, I conjure up my own 2x4 power and I use what I have to dismantle them, to disarm them, to put them on their knees, and to make them think twice about ever trying me again. And those are the parts of my daddy that we did not see often because my daddy was a lover, not a fighter, right? But when he needed to fight, he would. And he would use whatever it was that he had available to him. Now, a lot of times that was love that he used to disarm people. A lot of times that was him providing a resource, right? Because my father's faith was very important to him. And for those of you who know that anytime someone came to Jesus with a need, or when the disciples really would come to Jesus with a need from the community, so to speak, right? Jesus always made sure they met the physical need first. Because I can't hear you talk about the love of God and the love of Jesus and how this walk is the walk that you need to be on when I'm hungry, when I'm naked, when I'm homeless, when I can't find a job, when I'm on drugs, when I think like the whole world is out to get me. I can't hear you when I feel like every turn I make is killing me slowly. And that's what my daddy would do. He always met the physical need first. And then he would give love and give mentorship and redirection and coaching. And that's a lot of what I do, right, with these boys. So my daddy's method of disarming them, redirecting them from foolishness, was love. And I couldn't ever figure out, why is it that I know what a lot of these young men do, but yet I never make them feel bad about it? Is because innately what had been burned into my psyche was meet their need first. When you meet their need first, it's now easier to have the conversation about what needs to be done differently. So while a lot of people are out here telling these young Black boys, don't do this, don't do that. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? You know you have no business saying that. You have no business smoking that. You have no business carrying that. And while there may be some truth in it, until you understand the lives that they're leading, the lifestyles that they are privy to, right? Literally the homes that they are coming from, if they have a stable one to be in. It's really hard to tell them that all of what they're doing is wrong when all of what they're doing has been keeping them alive thus far. There's one particular young man that we've been working with very, very closely over the last month, really. And other people have joined in and they are providing support where they can. And I told them, because they were surprised at not how intelligent he is, right? So I want to dispel that. They were surprised at how quickly he moved on whatever suggestion they made for him. And I told them this particular young man, if you're going to pull him out of something, you've got to plug him in immediately. There is no, well, don't do this and then let's figure out what we can do next. No, you need to let him do what he's been doing, figure out what the next is, and then when you pull him out, you plug him in. And pulling him out and plugging him in has kept him away from some other peers that have been negative influences on him, because it's not so much that he wanted to be with folks that weren't trying to do different for their lives. It was that in his teenage mind, he could not figure out what the next was for himself. So if we're going to pull them out, plug them in, but it has to happen simultaneously. And that's one of the things that we've learned over these last 2.5 years working with this particular group of young people is that it's not that they want to be out there doing the things that y'all got so much to say about. It's the fact that nobody plugs them back into something when you've pulled them out of it. Right? So that was my issue a lot of times a couple of summers ago when police officers would constantly stop them. And it's like, oh, well, we have plenty of programs. Well, where are the programs? Because if you're going to detain him, then the very next day you need to plug him into something. You can't detain him from selling water. Tell him, well, it's illegal and you shouldn't be doing this. And then you just say, we have plenty of programs. And then you plug them in weeks later, a month later, or there's not enough room for all of them, or the programming that's there is not conducive to really understanding that you need to slowly remove them from their situations. Because the fact of the matter is they still got to go back to wherever they call home. So we use a lot of love around here, a lot of tough love. Answer's not always yes. The answer's not always, oh, I understand why you do what you do and why you have what you have. But the answer is always love and not judging. The answer is always love and making sure that they understand that we're not calling them wrong. One of the things that I'm very adamant about in our organization and the work that we do is that we never use the word better. We never say do better, be better. Because if you think about someone whose mind is still developing, right? It's really hard to sometimes decipher, oh, they just want me to change my behavior, not that who I am inherently is wrong. So let's just forget that. Why give them more to have to deal with, right? So choose differently. There's something different you can choose. Saying that there's something different to choose doesn't necessarily mean that I have now called you wrong. Because if we are honest with ourselves, there's a lot of times adults are in miscommunication because of language and not being intentional about the words that we're using. And now we got all kinds of burn bridges and all kinds of foolishness happening amongst adults because we didn't stop long enough to think about our language. We didn't stop long enough to communicate in a different way. So I'm very intentional about making sure that when we are communicating with them, even when we're having fun, even when we're having a good time, how we communicate with them, the tone we use, the volume we use, the words we use always makes a difference. And there's a time and a place for everything. And so now that we've built this relationship and we've built this trust, I can now say, okay, well, when you come to my house, you don't need to bring that. When you are in programming with, hey, I don't want to see that. Because this is now a safe space. We have proven to you that this is a safe space. We have made sure that there is safety and the parameters and the boundaries of what we have control over, that you don't need to bring anything extra in order for you to cope or to feel as though you need to protect yourself. And that is why what we do is a little different from what other folks are doing. Everything that folks are doing related to young people matters because we are all filling a niche. We're all serving a group of young people that can connect to who and what we are and what we provide. And so there should be no competition among youth serving organizations. There are too many young people out here that need the support for us to be worried about competition. For me, it's collaboration over competition. And there are going to be multiple organizations that are going to serve the same kid because we're going to do different things. Right? And so once we realize that and we know that, then it's easier to continue to lead in love because what we understand and what we know is that love disarms and love dismantles. And when we're able to do that, then we can give the tools, the resources, the wisdom, the guidance, the skills, the correction needed in order for them to wholly accept it and apply it to their lives the best way that they know how so that they can show up in the world differently. But I bring all that up and I tie all that together because I sometimes often wondered, why do I do the things that I do? Why do I serve these young people the way that I serve them? Why do I care about them the way that I care about them? In particular, young Black boys, young Black men, young Black youth, male teens, however you want to describe them. Because I saw my daddy do it. And I saw that it worked when they worked it. When they took what daddy gave and they applied it to their lives the best way they knew how. Their lives then became different. And so that's all I want to do. I want to show up. I want my light to shine so bright that encountering me, your life is different. I want to make sure that when I show up in love. I want to make sure that I am able to continue to remind myself that imposter syndrome has no place in my life because I am who I am and I show up ready to do the work. And I'm empowered by my faith. I'm empowered by my ancestors. I'm empowered by family who's gone on before me, but family that is still here, that continues to encourage me and push me. And I realize that so many of the young people we work with don't have that. And if I can be that for them, then hopefully one day they can be that for somebody else. So I know today was a little bit different than what we've been usually getting, but I thought it was important to understand how and why I come to this work. And really all of us can do exactly what I shared today. It doesn't have to be Black male youth on the west side of Atlanta. You can start in your own home. Scare your kids today. Make them laugh. Love on them. Say I love you a little bit more than you've been saying it before. Right? Be sure to never make them feel wrong. Make them feel as though they are wrong. Accept them where they are. And know that love disarms. Right? It disarms. It breaks down the boundaries to allow you to get to the heart of the matter. All right, y'all. Till next time on the front porch with KaCey. Make sure you stay well, you be well, and we'll talk soon.